Hello and welcome to Responsible Government Contracting. This workshop is part 2 of a 3-part series introducing government contracting. Today, Mr. Andy Bennett will discuss researching and finding opportunities with the government. Thank you, and find us on the web at nc-rgc.com.
Like I said I wanted to start out a little bit differently this week because 60 Minutes had a big episode come out on, I think it was Sunday. And the first segment, and I'm going to pull up their website here so you guys can see it. So the first segment, I'll put this in the link also. I'll put this in the chat. So if you guys did not watch this, I encourage you to watch it, because this is a lot of the stuff that my professional career has been resisting, this kind of thing that they talk about in that episode. I'm going to put a blog. I'm going to do a little bit of more research, so there's some data associated with this. But if you haven't, has anybody actually seen this? Has anybody got a chance to watch this yet? Maybe a thumbs up or thumbs down? All right, so if you have not gotten a chance to watch that, I definitely encourage you to, because they did a decent job of showing what some players, some companies in the industry, in the defense industry, kind of tend towards. And one of the things that leads to that price gouging, and that's what they kept talking about, that's what the objective was, that's what the topic was. So the price gouging really is topical for what we're going to be discussing today. And by way of introduction, my name's Andy Bennett. This is my company, and the website and everything are on there. So feel free to take a screenshot of that. All right, 3, 2, 1. And this video will be up on my website later, like Patricia said. So what we're talking about today in part 2 of this 3-part series is the research phase. And what the 60 Minutes research, what that article was talking about, what that video was talking about, was price gouging. And when you go in to look at what the company was doing, and this is like the Raytheons and the Boeings and these kinds of guys, if the government has a specialty, if they're the only ones that make that cable, that whatever it is, and it is a monopoly, right? Because if you're the only one doing something, that's the definition of a monopoly. So understanding what those government requirements are, because the government's big and there's a lot of different, crevices and cracks and everything. There's a lot of things that the government does. So if in this case the government is doing a special helicopter, and that helicopter has a special type of wire harness or something that it needs, then if there are different places to shop for that wire harness, then there's going to be competition in the market. That's capitalism 101. However, if there's only one place that's doing that thing, if there's only one company that's making that specific wire harness or whatever it is, then it becomes a challenge, because there's no competition. So that's what we're resisting against when we talk here. I enjoy the competition side of things. I enjoy that when you're going head to head, there are benefits to the small business world, but please don't let that article, that 60 Minutes thing, dissuade you or kind of steer you away from doing government contracting. Because although those things do happen, the 60 Minutes of the world will expose that, and Congress will come down like a ton of bricks, right? So that will take care, that will correct itself. If I can get one message across to you, understand the rules of the game, and then play the game with humility and bring to the table what it is that you do well, because the government is going to be very interested in buying from you. All right. Enough of the soapbox. If you have any questions about that, please chime in. I do have my chat open just for administrivia. You got my website there on the chat as well, and let's dive in, because you can join this for listening to me harp about 60 about that 60 Minutes thing. Okay, so today we're talking about researching. I am going to ask for someone to be my guinea pig. So whoever chimes in first, I will use your company as my test case when we go through the actual research phase here, because we're going to do some real life researching. So in part one, we talked about the high level. What is the government contracting? What is acquisitions? How much does the government buy? What is small business? We talked a lot about small business. And just as a refresher, we'll kind of go through that again here. But the government is required to do business with small businesses. 23% of the federal budget has to be done with small businesses. There are different categories with that. So minority-owned companies and women-owned companies and veteran-owned companies, hub zone companies. All of those are special categories that have requirements in each, 5% with minority-owned, 5% with woman-owned, 3% with, Javinsky, you've got the guinea pig here, so you're it. Okay, so, and then 3% for veteran zone and 3% for hub zone. So if you qualify for any of those categories, I highly, highly recommend it, because the contracting officers are definitely, they are by law required to do business. It's not just a good idea, it's a federal law. So they have to do business with small businesses. We talked in part one about the 4 different hats, right? The 4 different legs of the table. And if you remember, got the cowboy hat for the finance people, the big, pirate captain hat for the commander. And then we start talking about the real people who make the decisions and the recommendations here. So the end user, and in my example, that's the hard hat, right? They're the boots on the ground. They're the closest user, mission partner, project manager on the government side. They're the client representative for that project. All right, so that's the end user. They come up with the requirements, they come up with the specifications. As we go through this research conversation, think about them as the people who care about the details of the job. If they're buying computers, they are the ones, this end user is the one that cares if it's a 15-inch monitor, or a 13-inch monitor, or a faster processor or a slower processor. If they're buying vehicles, if they're all-terrain vehicles, or if they're, gas efficient, whatever those in manufacturing, if you're ISO 9000 certified, those types of things, those specifications, those details, those are the things that you want to talk to and educate and sell the end users on. You want to convince them that you've got the greatest things in sliced bread. That's the end user conversation, and finding those people. Bottom right are the contracting officers. The contracting officer, and they're the crown, right? They're the king's crown. They're the crown because they're the ones that make the decisions. The contracting officer is the only one that has the authority to actually sign or obligate the federal government. And that's the same thing at state levels as well. So the contracting officer makes the decision. They don't know the first thing about construction or, vehicles or computers or whatever it is that's being purchased, or, products or services. Excuse me, they're the ones that follow the process. So making sure that there's competition, making sure that it's a fair and reasonable price, making sure that small businesses are used. So when you're talking to the contracting officers, that's when you want to talk about past performance. I've done this before. We know what we're doing. We have these credentials. We understand what we're doing. We're a small business. The contracting officer is very interested in small businesses. So those are the types of things that they care about. Let me pause there and see if you guys have any questions so far. Okay. So next up, just a different way to look at the same thing. The four legs of the table. So the commander and the end user are going to come up with the requirement, and then they're going to send a document. They're going to send the requirement. It's called a needs statement over to the contracting officer. The contracting officer is then going to go through the competition process. Very, very broad strokes here, guys. So this is very standard of how the process works. The end user is going to develop the requirement, and then the contracting officer is going to go do the shopping. They're going to do the pricing competition, all the proposals, all that's going to go to the contracting officer. So when we're going through the competitive process, once that process formally starts, don't talk to anybody anymore, because the end user, you can't talk to them. They won't answer your phone calls anymore, and they are isolated from the process anyway. Contracting officers won't answer your phone call, so just email them during the competitive process, that is. So just email them your questions and they'll respond formally so that everybody can see the answers to those questions. If you force that issue, that's where you can get into trouble. So it's called OCI, official conflict of interest. So you don't want to have inside information here. This is like, you hear about SEC or Wall Street, like SEC insider trading, that kind of thing. That's what this is. So the contracting officers know better, and now you know better. Don't talk to the contracting officers. Don't talk to anybody during the competitive process. And I'll tell you when that starts in a second here, because you will get booted. You will get kicked out of the competition for OCI violation. All right, and then the last part, the contracting officer does all the interface with the with industry. Industry is us, right? So commercial companies. We've kind of done the high level. Now we're going to start getting into the actual practical. How do I actually do this, Andy? What am I Google searching? Who am I shaking hands with? How do I find these people? All right. So that's what we're going to focus on now. I like to do this because you can find, Small Business Administration does this a lot. They do a lot of outreach. They do a lot of presentations. Lonnie does presentations from the Small Business Administration in the Florida area, but different representatives will go around to different spots. So that's kind of the left side of the screen here is the Small Business Administration. Notice that their email address is all SBA, Small Business Administration, SBA.gov. They work for that piece of the federal government. And other organizations are part of the SBA. So SCORE, if you've heard of that, SBDC, Small Business Development Centers, and then PTAC no longer exists. So PTAC is now Apex. So if you're going to look for these, those are the things that you're looking for. Those are all free resources that you can go to find out how the process works. They're going to tell you in different ways the same things that I'm telling you here. I highly encourage you to do that. Get as much information from as many different people as you can, and then make your own decisions as to what approach you want to take. I've been doing this for 21 plus years now, so I have my experience, my perspective, but that is by no means the end all be all. So reach out to these guys, listen to their briefings as well, and get them. They're great resources. On the other side of the screen here is an organization, right? These are not real people, so don't email these email addresses. So the reason I want to show you this is because the right side of the screen here are the ones with money. They are the ones that are actually competing efforts. These are the ones in blue here. These are the ones that you want to be talking to. The Small Business Administration is great for information, but you're winning contracts and grants and funding from the actual agencies, from those actual organizations. In this case, FEMA. So FEMA, remember what we talked about with the 4 legs of the table. FEMA is going to have somebody in charge, the director, agency director. Above FEMA is Department of Homeland Security, so they fall under FEMA as an organization under that. So FEMA is going to have a person in charge. That person in charge is going to set the broad mission type orders, the broad direction for the year. And then those project managers are going to execute that. And then the contracting officers, like we talked about, they're the ones that are going to do it. How do you find these people? Well, as a small business, John Smith here does not work for any of those contracting officers. John Smith, again, not a real person, but John Smith represents the Small Business Advocacy or Small Business Office or Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. Lots of different names, but you kind of get a sense that it's, that it's the same thing said different ways. So you can go to the actual agency's website and find the small business advocate. So somebody type in and send me, whoever, we'll just do it real time here. Pick a federal agency that you think you want to do business with. If not, I'll use FEMA and I'll show you their website and where to look on their site. You want to try and get as specific as you can and as local as you can. Because if you're trying to do business with MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, you don't want to look for the small business office for the Department of Defense, right? Because although they will eventually navigate you to the people you need to be talking to, it will take a long time and it will take a lot of phone calls. You don't want to, so Department of Defense, big, right? You also don't want to talk to the Air Force, right? Because MacDill Air Force Base falls under the Air Force, but the Air Force, again, super big organization. So their small business office is just going to guide you to who you need to be talking to. So as you navigate down and you get more and more local and more focused on who that office is, if you want to do business with MacDill and you're trying to reach out to MacDill, then you got a quick Google search, and I'm not seeing anybody, so I'm going to go ahead and use MacDill as my example here. So if I just go to MacDill, I'm just going to do a quick Google search. I'm going to let you guys watch it real time here. So I'm going to do a quick Google search for MacDill Air Force Base. And the quick search top rank here is going to show up with MacDill's website, right? So I'm going to look around here for something, and almost all of them are going to have it. Doing business with or small business office or something to that effect. So I'm going to look at about us, and I can see they've got some information down here. This is great. But what I saw that I keyed in on is the directory. So phone directory. So here's a phone directory. So I'm going to look for small. Okay, so there's no small. I'm going to look for contracting. If I can spell today. So their website is not as user-friendly. So what do I do in this situation? This is great because I love it when it's not. Let me show you one that's easy, and then we'll go back to the one that's not. So I'm going to look up FEMA, use them as an example. And we're going to do, okay, so see FEMA, I just went to FEMA.gov and look up here, I'm zooming in. So look up here and see working with us. So working with us, I'm going to look for this doing business with FEMA, all right? Something like that, right? I mean, you get a kind of flavor for it. And then right there, I'm going to zoom back out so you see what it actually looks like. FEMA Small Business Program. So this is where I start actually finding people, and see, they still call it PTAC, but that's just a legacy. They haven't updated their website yet. So I'm going to actually look for small business programs that are focused on, that are in FEMA, and they're going to tell me how to do business with FEMA. And there are going to be actual points of contact and offices that I can work with in FEMA. So if you're not finding that, small business or contracting office or anything like that, call the 1-800 number, call the base operator and say, I'm looking for contracting, or I'm looking for small business office. That's what, those are the keywords you want to ask for. Contracting squadron. In the Air Force, that's what that would be called. So contracting squadron, and then start zeroing in to get to the small business office. Now, why this is a little bit challenging here, because MacDill Air Force Base has a bunch of things going on there, right? So as I'm researching the agency, I need to realize that NOAA has an office on MacDill Air Force Base. CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command has their headquarters at MacDill. DIA has an office on MacDill. SOCOM, Special Operations Command, is headquartered at MacDill. Joint Communication Support Element is based out of MacDill. So there are a lot of people, agencies that are housed, they have their offices on that real estate on MacDill. And that's very, very standard for the military. Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, if you're in trucking or if you're in logistics, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, or Scott Air Force Base, they house Transportation Command, US Transcom. So it's not an Air Force organization, but it's the hub for all things logistics, all things transportation. So a lot of research and a lot of Googling will help guide you to that, but you have to know kind of what you're looking for. What you're looking for is small business advocate, small business office, or something that's kind of called that. All right, so that's how you navigate to, and once you get on the phone call with them, you start asking questions and tell what you do in the capability statement and that kind of thing. So as we go through this, those are the people that's John Smith. That's how you find John Smith, and that's who John Smith does, what he does. So his role in life is going to be understanding what you do as a business, as an organization, as a company, and then making sure to connect you with their contracting officers. So all of those contracting officers that work for that organization, John, this small business advocate, is going to be able to help connect you and introduce you to those different folks. So use that, because that's very, very powerful. That's a open door, that's a foot in the door, whatever you want to call it. That's a way to start introducing yourself to the organization or the agency that you want to deal with. All right, so next up, let's talk about where you fit in that process, where we are in that process. And as we'll go to sam.gov here in a second on the website, these terms are going to start making sense. This is every step of the process. This is every potential step of the process. Not very, very, very few opportunities go through every single step, right? This is not, you don't do this all the time. This is just to show you where everything sits. So over here, the budget objectives, that's where the commander and the end users are going to sit together and figure out what that end objective is for the project. All right, so that's internal. That's just the government talking to itself. When the information starts to go public, that's when the contract officer has taken hold of the process, and then the contract officer is going to start shopping around. So that request for information and sources sought, kind of think of those together. That's in that pre-solicitation phase. The request for information and sources sought, they're doing that in order to find out information about the thing or the service that they're buying. If they're looking for writing utensils, then the request for information is going to be, okay, tell me about your company, tell me about any small business certifications that you have, and then tell me about writing utensils. And your response, or writing devices, your response can be, okay, well, there's printers, there's pencils, there's pens, there's markers. There are all these options for, writing down things. And you are starting to educate the client, the contracting officer, about what it is that they're looking for, right? So in that, you can tell them, well, my pencils have this fancy grip that keeps you writing for 15 hours a day without your hand getting tired, right? So you can start to fit in your sales opportunities in your document that you respond to that request. And what that looks like is the request for information is a document that's posted. We'll see some right now or in a second here. And it has a list of questions that the government is asking industry. You read that question, answer the question, put it in your proposal, put it in your response, and you submit it back you email it back to the government, to that contracting officer. And in that proposal, in that response, you're going to tell them about pencils. You're going to tell them about pens. You're going to tell them about markers. You're going to tell them about your pencils and your pens and your markers, and maybe even why yours are better than theirs, right? Competitive, strategic, why yours are better than theirs. What this is not, they're not looking for pricing. They're not going to make an award just off of the RFI or sources sought. What they may do is a sole source. So that's a possibility. We'll talk about that too. So why are they going through this step? I cannot stress to you enough how important small businesses are to the government, to federal government. They have to award any effort that they think is going to be $350,000 or less. It's called the simplified acquisition threshold. So anything under $350,000, they have to award to small businesses. But that means they have to find small businesses. And the RFI, request for information, and sources sought, that's how they do that. That's how they say, hey, if you're a small business and you sell pencils, please tell me that you exist, respond to my RFI so that I can make this a set aside contract, right? So if it's called the rule of two, if two or more minority-owned small businesses, if two or more woman-owned small businesses, if two or more of the same category of that small business category respond to an RFI or sources sought, then that contracting officer can say, I'm going to eliminate all other competition and only allow minority-owned companies to compete. And then you have to be a minority-owned company in order to respond and receive that contract award. Okay, so that's called a aside. If you're really convincing and you have one of those categories, they can do what's called a sole source. Less common, but you can get a sole source if you have that relationship and you have that conversation with the end user, and that end user knows that your product or service can satisfy exactly what they're looking for, and there's not a whole lot of competition, there's not a whole lot of other things that we talked about, right? This is where that 60 Minutes article was talking about, like we talked about up front. If there are no other companies that make the thing that you are selling or doing, then the contracting officer can do a sole source contract award to you. Now, typically, that's only up to $4.5 million per contract award, all right? So they've got to jump through some hoops to do that, but it does happen, so don't stress. But if you have something that is that specialized, then that's an option too. That's called a sole source contract. Okay, so that's the top level. The second line here is the actual competition. So this is where the solicitation gets real. The RFP, the request for proposal, request for quote, actually comes out, and you start seeing things like the details, the statement of work, the performance work statement, all that kind of stuff is going to be in a document, in several documents, and you read through that because that's the description of the work that's going to be done. You need to read through that, make sure you understand it, and then that's how you respond with your proposal. So we'll talk about that in part 3. If you are a small business, and again, I can't stress that enough, you for sure need to be responding to RFIs and sources sought, but then also respond to the RFPs. One thing that I find is sometimes when a contract officer puts out an RFI, they may only allow the companies that responded to the RFI, they may only email directly those companies the actual proposal. So if you are just watching an RFI and you don't actually respond to it, you may never see, because you didn't respond to it, you may never see the actual RFP, the request for proposal. And then you don't even have an opportunity to submit a bid. So just keep that in mind as well. I like to respond, do a blend, respond to RFIs and RFPs, but just understand that if you're a small business your opportunity to get it as a set aside to that category, which eliminates a lot of competition. That benefits the small business. That's when you respond to RFIs and sources sought. Okay. Another detail here. We talked a lot in part 1 about NAICS codes. I pronounce it NAICS. It's North American Industry Classification System, NIACS, right? So NAICS codes. This is what determines if you are a small business or not. So this is a live sheet from the 2022 release. They update this every couple of years. And on the left-hand side here, you can see some of those NAICS codes. And to find this document, it's just SBA Small Business Size Standards. That's what this is called. I've got it up there on the top, Small Business Size Standards. So it should look like this. This is the real document, or a page from the real document. And you can see on each of these categories, let's take security guards at the top. So if your business is security guards, if that's what you do, one of your NAICS codes is going to be 561612. Okay, great. You are a small business as long as you have gross revenues, annual gross revenues under $25.5 million. Excuse me, that's a 5-year running average. Okay, so for the past 5 years, you would have had a running average of more than $25.5 million. If you have 1 year of $26 million, you're still a small business until you have that 5-year running average of annual gross revenues of more than $25.5 million. And you can see that changes per category. So if you had $30 million of gross revenues for the last 10 years, 5 years, 6 years, then you are no longer a small business in that category, but you still qualify in armored car services, right? So you can be a mixture based on your NAICS code and the size standard. Down here, though, you see this is the only one in this other column. Industry to industry, it's different. And NAICS code to NAICS code, it's different. And it's either one or the other. It's either the revenue of the company or the number of employees, W-2 employees of the company. So if you're in environmental remediation services, if that's your business, then you are still a small business until you have 750 or more employees, right? So just keep that in mind. All right, so now let's get into the weeds. Research and targeting. Understand the language that we're speaking and understand the words, just like we talked about with small businesses, right? So the small business office, small business advocate, small business advisor, office of small and disadvantaged utilization, all of that stuff are saying the same thing, but like the Army versus the Air Force. The Army calls, maybe they call it a weapon system, and the Air Force calls it a program of record, right? So there will be nuances of the language of the words that the agency uses based on what they're familiar with. You can talk to them, you can go to their industry days, listen into some of their industry outreach, those types of things, read their websites, do that type of research so you understand what language they use. So that helps you with the keyword searching that we're going to do in a second. Also, look at the thing that they're selling, stick a pin in that, and then look at what else that thing could be considered. What do I mean? When you're looking for a NAICS code, that contracting officer has to pick one NAICS code for that opportunity. So if they're building a building, they're not going to use the electrical NAICS code. Although they need an electrician to build a building, the preponderance, the majority of the work to build that building is not electrical. It's not plumbing, it's not carpentry, it's a conglomerate of all these things. So how do they do that? Well, they're probably going to be in general contracting, right? So general construction NAICS code. So if you are an electrician, you need to know your business enough to know that that's probably what the contracting officer is going to see it as, and then what are those circles outside of it so that you can research for that. Because if you sell chairs, a contracting officer will pick 337214 to compete for opportunities. Another contracting officer will pick 337121, and another will pick 337125. Those are different, and if you're only searching for the one, you're never going to see the others. Said differently, if you're doing janitorial services, 561720, you'll find that one, you'll find that one, but you're not going to find that one, because that changes. The contracting officer is still correct, and it's the contracting officer's job to pick that NICE code. But if they pick one that you're not looking for, you're never going to find that opportunity. Okay. So now I've given you the baseline. Now let's go into the actual sam.gov site. So this site is also where I showed you last time to do your registration. Conveniently, the same site. If it's been a minute, you may have heard this as FBO, or Federal Business Opportunities. More recently, it was beta.sam.gov. It's now sam.gov. So they've gone through that migration, and that's complete. So now everything is under the sam.gov umbrella. This is what that website looks like. All right, so I put the link in there. There are several companies that have very, very convincing websites. So just be sure that you look for the one that is this. Okay, take a screenshot if you want, but this is the one. All right, so now we already talked, so I'm going to fast forward through this part. We already talked about how to get this registration. This is free. You don't pay for it. You can. There's GovWin, there's GovTribe. There are several different companies that make websites that pull the same data. It's just user preference. You have to pay for those. This is free. This is good enough. I still go to this one, even though I have a subscription to one or the other. So you don't have to pay for the registration. You log in, you do that credentialing once. I'm going to pull up my authenticator app. I'm doing my two-factor authentication that we talked about last week. And then I'm in. So I'm going to click up here on search. And this is where you want to start screenshotting. All right, so figure out your buttons, because I'm gonna show you some stuff that you're going to want to take note of. Remember all those terms that we just went over to. So I hit the page, I went to search. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. All right, so search. It's important that you log in to do this, because you're going to be able to see the documents once you log in. You're going to be able to follow up and track opportunities once you log in. And again, this is free. This is because you're a taxpayer. All right, so what do I use for these searches? Well, I like to do, okay, so the other thing for kind of the setup is domain. So expand this little plus here, do contract opportunities. All right, so now I've got I did search, I did contract opportunities. Now I get a whole bunch more search opportunities. I am not going to do anything here. So federal organization, you may, if you're hunting for FEMA work, you may want to put FEMA in here. I don't recommend doing that. Why? Because that end user and that contracting officer, they may be in different locations. They may be in different organizations. The Army may be the end user, and NASA may be the contracting office. The Air Force may be the end user, and National Institutes for Health may be the contracting office. So some contracting officers will put in their organization, even though they're not the end user. Others will put the end user in for that. So be careful with that, and just understand that the government's kind of wonky how it does that that determination. So I like to leave this one blank, just because I can't read the contracting officer's mind. We need to kind of be a little bit flexible there. Dates. This one is, you can play around with this and say anything that's coming up due, right? So that's what that means. Response due dates within the next month, okay? But I like to do custom date and say, and remember, I'm looking at due dates. So when are proposals due? Because if there's a proposal due, at noon in, 17 minutes or so, I'm not going to be able to get a proposal together by then. So it's a waste of my time to look for proposals that are due in the next 17 minutes. So let's say it takes me 3 days to put a proposal together. So what I did was under response due dates, I went to custom, and then okay, so today's the 24th. I'm going to say, well, that's a holiday. So let's say the 30th. And then I want to give it some time. So I'm going to let this go out to the end of the fiscal year. All right. So let's do September 30th. All right. So update, I'm going to leave that blank anytime, right? So that's the dates. Notice type. This is where those lines come into play. So notice type, I'm going to click the little arrow. It's going to give me these options. I'm going to do sources sought. I'm going to do pre-solicitation. That's the overarching. I'm going to do combined, substantially bundled, consolidated, substantially bundled. I'm going to do solicitation. I'm going to do combined synopsis, solicitation, and that should be it. Yeah. I may throw in special notice. Usually that's, an industry day or something like that. But for now, I'll just leave that off. Okay. So products and service. This is where, okay. So Javinsky, do you already know, since you're my guinea pig today, do you already know a NICE code for your company?
No, I don't.
Okay, so here's another opportunity here. So I like North American Industry Classification System.com. I have no affiliation with them. I just use the heck out of their website. Here it is on the chat. Okay, so Javinsky, why don't you give me a couple of keywords, describe what it is that you do.
I'm a business consultant. I help small businesses, startups. I develop business plans for them, business proposals, and I guide them basically how to turn their ideas into a profitable business.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to say, so I typed in a couple of keywords that I started hearing him say into this website, just under Nike search, and then all these options start popping up. So this is where you have to make a judgment call, and you have to look at these and see what, think about a chair, and how is a contracting officer going to see that chair, and what NICE codes are they going to think about, because they're the ones that have to pick. So if I'm looking at that, I'm for sure going to do all other business support services, right? That's an other, that's kind of a catch-all. For sake of time, let's just use that one and start with that. So I'm going to copy that, 561499. I'm going to go back over to my sam.gov search, and I'm going to type in 54. I could just paste it, but I want to let you know, I want to show you what happens here. Notice as I start typing in that 6-digit NICE code, that's getting more specific as I type in numbers. So the first two numbers, that's broad. So notice that's all professional, scientific, and technical services. The 5-4 category includes all of the NICE codes for professional, scientific, and technical services. That's a big category. As I start to type in more, it gets more and more specific. So I was 556. I misspoke here. 561 for. So 561 is administrative support services 4. And we start to get more other support, and you can see some others here, and we start to get more specific here. So that's the one I'm going to select. And then set aside. This is another one that I don't do anything with. I personally leave this one blank. So the set aside category, remember the process. The contracting officer, if you're looking for RFIs and sources sought, at that stage, the contracting officer does not yet know if they want that opportunity to be a set aside for minority or woman-owned or whatever the category is. They're still shopping. They're still looking for small businesses. They're still looking around. So if you pick, an 8A set aside, minority owned set aside, you're not going to see those potential RFIs that you could be that could be the type of work that you want. So I like to leave this open so that you're not taking, if you're not taking opportunities off the table. Place performance, same thing with the separation between the contract officer and the end user. If those two people don't sit together, which they rarely do, they more often than not sit in different locations. And if the contracting officer decides to put their location in versus where the actual place of performance is, then you're not going to find what you're going to be looking for a lot of opportunities out of Washington, D.C. When the work is actually being performed in Georgia or California or Montana or wherever, right? So I like to leave that one blank just on initial search. The default is active. If you're looking for something, historical, you can put inactive. And then it automatically filters as we go. So holy cow, we got one hit. So we have one opportunity that fits all of these parameters. So an opportunity that's coming out between May and September in this stage and in this business category here. If I want to widen that search, let me take that off and do business support. I now have almost 2,000 results, right? So this is just like a Google search. You have to play around with those parameters. There is not one right way. The one right way to do it is the way that finds the opportunities that you're interested in, okay? So use the tools that I'm kind of leaving you here with and play with those parameters. You can do a keyword up here. You see it right here. You can take it off. Notice what happens. We pop up to 7,500 opportunities. You can do it by the dates. You can widen that date range. Let me put business support back up here. And then let me widen that. Okay, notice it's 1944. Let me widen that date out to the end of the calendar year and see. Yep, so we picked up, a few more opportunities there because we changed the parameters. Now, 2,000 opportunities, that's a lot to read through, right? So you probably want to limit that down because you are not in the business of proposals. I'm in the business of proposals. So if you focus too much on this, it's going to take away from your day-to-day business. So you need to get this filter down where it's quick and easy for you to read. There's a great book. It's called Getting to Yes, Getting Past No. Get to know quickly. Figure out what opportunities you don't care about and move past them. Don't try and make everything fit. Okay, so once I'm happy and I've played around with those parameters and everything, I can save that search because I logged in. And again, this is what the SBDC and the Apex guys are going to do for you. They're going to do what I just showed you how to do. And then you're going to get an email. You tell it the frequency every day, every week. They kind of consolidate everything. And that's up to you. You'll get a bunch of emails because there are hundreds and hundreds of opportunities every single day. So save the search once you spend time developing it, and then you'll get that notification anytime something hits. All right, so now shift over. We've done the search. We're happy with the parameters. Now let's shift over to the right side of the screen here. Let me show you what you're looking at. So each of these is an opportunity, okay? Each of these is an individual opportunity. And I can very quickly just look at that section. And what I see is, okay, this is an opportunity that's been modified a couple of times. So amendment number 2, that means there was the original opportunity, amendment number 1, and now amendment number 2. So this one's been out for a minute. Current date offers due. So when is it due? June 2nd at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Don't mess around with the due date. They mean it. If you send it at 2:01 p.m., you're not going to be in consideration. Don't mess around with that. It's the Department of Defense and it's the Army, and then Fort Sill is the actual end customer here. So if that looks like something that's interesting to me, then if it's not, I'm gonna move on and scroll through the ones that actually look interesting to me. So let's go back to, I'm gonna go back to that, what was that? 561, what was it, 561,499? Yeah. So let's go back and find that one that we found. Okay. So I've looked through the opportunities, and let's say, actually, let me leave that blank for a second. So let's say I find a few that are interesting. Rather than going back and forth, I'm going to teach you a little pro tip here. On my mouse, there's a button on my scroll bar. Okay, so I can scroll, but if I click that button on that scroll bar, if I go over the link and I click that little button, look at what it does. I'm using Chrome, but if I click that button, it's going to open up the opportunity in a new tab. So I can stay on my page and open up a bunch of opportunities that I want to go look at in the next step. All right, so let's say I'm interested in that one. I'm interested in that one. Not so much that one, but maybe that one. All right, and now I'm going to go back to my filter and say 561, 499. I'm gonna get to my one, and I'm for sure interested in that one. So I'm gonna open up that tab. Now notice what I've done. I've focused on my filter. I'm not, being distracted. I focused on my filter. I picked the ones that kind of look just from a high level that have looked interesting. I've opened them up in new tabs. Now I can shift over to those tabs. And notice how all of these look very, very similar. So let me show you what you're looking at. The logo may or may not show up. Don't stress about that. This is the name of that opportunity. If you want a unique ID or like the social security number for that opportunity, this notice ID is that, right? So if you want to track opportunities and have some unique way to identify this one versus that one, it's the notice ID. That's going to stay the same notice ID throughout the process until award. You can see the chain of command. So this is the Department of Defense, Army, National Guard Bureau. I happen to know that. You can Google it and figure it out, but National Guard Bureau. And then this is, I don't know that one, so let's do a quick search. This is Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. Okay, so these are the guys that are doing this opportunity, probably training, or Tennessee Army National Guard. So this is probably an opportunity for the Tennessee Army National Guard. All right, so just from the top section, I've kind of sussed that out. Now I can see, okay, what stage are they in? They're in that solicitation phase. When is it due? It was actually just published yesterday, and it's due on the 13th. If there were a set aside, remember we talked about set asides? If there were a small business set aside, it would be here. If there's nothing here, like in this case, there's nothing listed here, that means it's a full and open competition. That means you're competing against everybody. Let me find one that's not. That's full and open. There we go. All right, so see on this one, this opportunity is a total small business set aside. So you're only going to be competing against other small businesses. Okay, let's see what this one is. And notice how it's in the same place every time. Okay, so there's no set aside for that one. All right, so we're back on this Army one, the Army National Guard. Down below the classification is, and there's that NAICS code that we were looking for, is the description. Now, sometimes you will see a lot of information here, sometimes you won't. Sometimes they describe everything right here, sometimes they don't. That's okay. So we will go into more detail about this step in the next workshop when we actually develop the proposals and the responses. But in the research phase, if I've whittled down from 2,000 or a couple hundred down to 4 opportunities, and I still am interested in this opportunity, down in the documents, what I'm going to look for is either SOW, which is statement of work, or PWS, which is performance work statement. So in that performance work statement, this is where they actually tell us this is a 5-year contract, and this is the thing that they want done. So this is the work that's actually being done. Scroll down to paragraph 3, like they said. Okay, so Government furnished property material. This is the work that they want done. All right. So if I'm still interested in this, I'm going to track this internally, and I'm going to respond. I'm going to develop a proposal and respond to it, which we'll talk about in the next class, in the next workshop in part 3. Okay. So we have a couple of minutes left. Let me pause and leave that open for questions. What questions do you guys have?
Can you look at this as starting off with awarded to small businesses? So that when you use your filter, you are looking at small business opportunities and not necessarily a prime opportunity.
Okay, so you're crossing streams there for a second. So a small business can be a prime. All prime's talking about is that you have privity of contract, you have that direct relationship with the government. So the government awards a contract, that awardee is a prime. Anybody below that is a subcontractor. Okay, so just so we're on the same terminology. With that said, a small business can absolutely be a prime. So give me a little bit more information on your question, if you don't mind.
I guess what I'm looking at is when I'm filtering it out, I'm trying to determine opportunities more geared towards smaller businesses that are doing less than 5 million, whatever the SBA classification for that is,
Sure.
And assessing based on that, because I'm finding that when I'm looking for some opportunities that I may be qualified for, but they're not necessarily looking for small businesses, and that would have to then, what's the word that they use? I've got to work with a larger entity company and work with them to secure the contract, or if they're looking at securing the contract, I'm a sub to them.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So we can go into a lot more detail with that. So that's a strategy question, right? So if you can join the next part, right, and that'll be part of the strategic teaming. So what you just described to me is teaming versus going alone. So let's talk a little bit more detail about that in part 3. But what I would suggest is do the research and then even go a step further, go to the agency's website. Usually what they will do is do a forecast, or an industry outreach kind of thing. And the agencies, even at the office level, they will publicly post what their forecasts or what their objectives are for the year. And that's where they'll tell you before they even make it to sam.gov, it'll be like a spreadsheet, and they will say the major projects or the bigger kind of projects that they're going to be working on in that year. And then you can start to target, okay, that looks really interesting. Can I handle it myself, or do I need to partner with somebody? Okay, what are those companies? What are those big companies that I want to partner with? And then start doing outreach to those guys. Larger companies are set up almost identically the same way that I showed earlier. They often have channel partners or outreach or even small business offices, because we didn't really talk about it here, but the federal government has their small business requirements, right? That 23%, and then the subcategories that we talked about. Large companies, or even large companies that have contract awards of $750,000 or more, must also use small businesses, and they're either that same level that the federal government has or greater. So a large company with $1 million contract has to use small businesses to satisfy that work. About a quarter of that budget has to be spent with small businesses. So for sure, try and suss out what those actual opportunities are, and then target the large companies or even the incumbents if you want to do as a subcontractor. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys, any other questions? All right, guys, give me a minute to let me put my shameless plug up here again. Okay, so I will have this up on my website. Patricia already put the link in there. So if you have any questions, I will put this recording up on the website free of charge, of course. And that's my contact information there. So if you want to reach out, please do so. All right, guys, I hope to see you guys in part 3.
Thank you for your time today. We hope this workshop was instructive and informative. Please find additional accredited courses and other support services on our website at nc-rgc.com.